Face coverings have become mandatory in more indoor settings in England following a recent spike in coronavirus cases. Places where coverings must now be worn include museums, cinemas, places of worship, massage parlours, aquariums. Meanwhile, tougher restrictions banning friends and family meeting in each other's houses have come into force in Preston in Lancashire, where there's been a sharp rise in COVID infections. This comes as new quarantine rules for travellers to the UK have also come into effect. Anyone now arriving in England, Scotland or Northern Ireland from Belgium, Andorra and the Bahamas will have to quarantine for 2 weeks. Let's catch up with Dr. Duncan Robertson from Loughborough University School of Business and Economics. Duncan, hi.
Morning, Ben. Hi.
Is it getting more complicated or is it just my head?
There's a lot going on, isn't there? I mean, I think there's data coming out of all sorts of sources, and yes, it does get more complicated. Well, I think the thing is it's going down to a more local level. So I think, a few weeks ago we were just looking at the country as a whole and imposing lockdowns on the entire country, and now we're looking at individual areas like Leicester, as you say, like Preston, and that's where it gets more and more complicated and more data to analyse, if you like.
So we're all kind of getting used to putting our masks on to go to shops, supermarket or the petrol station or wherever. Why now do we also have to do it in museums and cinemas and so on?
Well, I think the general consensus is that outdoors the risk is lower than indoors. So, if this virus does hang around inside, then of course you want to mitigate the spread of the virus, and you do that in two ways. One is to prevent you getting virus, and you might want to do that, but also to prevent other people getting the virus. And of course, that tends to be where masks are used, is to prevent, if you do have it, and you may not know it, you may be asymptomatic, you may not have symptoms, is to prevent that virus being spread to other people. So I think, as people become more willing to wear masks and there's less of a social hurdle to get over, why not?
It's funny how quickly it's become the social norm, though, hasn't it?
It's amazing, actually, and I think, absolutely. When I was sort of thinking back in the early months, I remember having a conversation thinking, it's completely unacceptable to come into a workplace wearing a mask. You'd just be kind of ostracised. Whereas now, people want to wear masks. I think they realise that there is a reason to do so, and it's much better to do it than not.
Let's just look at some of the numbers, which you always interpret so well for us. As far as the England numbers this week, where are we with that?
So the numbers generally in the country are going up slightly, but as you say, these are localised, and I think that the focus is going away from Leicester. So I think in the latest report there are 57 cases per 100,000, and we said the threshold is about 50 for interventions. But the thing about that is there are far more people being tested in Leicester than the average. So about 350 people per 100,000 are tested in Leicester, as opposed to about 100 in the rest of England. So you're going to get some more cases because of more testing, but the trend is definitely down in Leicester. So, we now move on to Leicester, to the northwest. And, so good news for Leicester. And especially good news for Rutland, actually. There were no cases actually reported in Rutland. That doesn't, of course, mean everyone should go to Rutland. It's a nice place it is.
No matter how lovely it is, of course. But look, just as far as the numbers go, how statistically do you detect then where the level really is? If you ramp up the detection rate, so you're detecting more cases, how do you know whether that's an increase in the sort of wild sort of infection in the community, or whether actually that number's going down? It's just we're detecting more. How do you work that out?
Exactly. So, what we've tended to look at is just the number of cases, and that's just, if people have had a test and it's come back positive, that's counted as a case. There are two ways of doing it. One is the Office of National Statistics does a survey, basically just of random people around the country, and then they will sort of see whether people have it or do not have it. And that's a good, statistical way of doing it. And the other thing is, if, as well as the number of tests you do, you want to see how many of those come back positive. So this sort of positivity rate is something you can track as well. So it's not just the number of cases, it's kind of how many cases come back positive. And of course, do you test in areas which to have a high prevalence or not? So, you have to do quite a lot of analysis to actually get a true picture.
I mean, I asked a question actually because I had lots of clips of Donald Trump talking over the last week or two, saying we've got high cases because we've got high testing. Is the correlation that clear?
Well, it depends what you're trying to do. Of course, if you're trying to get no cases, then you do no testing, and of course that doesn't mean it's gone away. But you sort of have to use the assumption that people are trying to get the best data they can. And of course, one of the reasons for testing is not just to count the numbers, it's so that you can then mitigate. So, part of this is about test and trace and isolate and get rid of the people from general circulation, or take them, get them to stay at home, because that is stopping the virus spreading. So, that's why people are doing this testing. It's to try and isolate them from spreading it on.
And just to reiterate, to go back to that point about Leicester, so 57 and a bit, I think it's 57.1, is it, cases per 100,000? That trend coming down, how quickly is it coming down? It's
coming down relatively slowly. So I think over the last few weeks, it's about half, just under half of the peak, and the peak was I think about 6 or so weeks ago. So it's coming down, and it will probably start to slow. The rate of descent will start to slow, I think. So we'll be going. My prediction is we'll be going down slowly. Of course, but then other outbreaks can happen. So you can never predict this with any certainty. But I think that the measures that have been taken in Leicester obviously haven't done any harm in terms of the transmission. So I think people are aware of what they need to do, as you say, wear masks, wash hands, and things like that, which will help the virus kind of slow.
Duncan, as always, great to talk to you on a Monday. Thank you.
Great, thanks, man.
Thanks ever so much. There was Dr. Duncan Robertson. You can find him online, often tweets as well, really fascinating threads about really digging into the numbers and what they actually mean. He's from Loughborough University. We'll chat to him again next week.